Assalamu Alaikum, everyone. So we are just about to start the study, and God willing, today we're going to be reading from Surah 16, from verse 27, uh, or 28, and we're going to read probably all the way to verse 60, I believe. Yeah. Okay. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Death for the disbelievers. Verse 28. The angels put them to death in a state of wronging their souls. That is when they finally submit and say, "We did not do anything wrong." Yes, indeed, God is fully aware of everything you have done. Therefore, enter the gates of hell, wherein you abide forever. What a miserable destiny for the arrogant ones. The believers do not really die. As for the righteous, when they're told, when they're asked, "What do you think of these revelations from your Lord?" they say, "Good." For those who lead a righteous life, happiness and the abode of the hereafter is even better. What a blissful abode for the righteous. The gardens of Eden are reserved for them, wherein rivers flow. They have anything they wish therein. God thus rewards the righteous. They go straight to paradise. The angels terminate their lives in a state of righteousness, saying, "Peace be upon you. Enter paradise now as a reward for your works." The disbelievers, are they waiting for the angels to come to them, or until your Lord's judgment comes to pass? Those before them did the same thing. God is not the one who wronged them. They're the ones who wronged their own souls. They have incurred the consequences of their evil works, and the very things they ridiculed came back to haunt them. Famous excuse. The idol worshippers say, "Had God willed, we would not worship any idols besides Him, nor would our parents. Nor would we prohibit anything besides His prohibitions. Those before them have done the same. Can the messengers do anything but deliver the complete message?" And the footnote for 16:30 to 32 says, "The righteous taste only the first death, which has been already experienced by all of us." See 44:56. At the end of their interim in this world, the angels of death simply invite them to move on to the paradise where Adam and Eve once lived. 2:154, 3:169, 8:24, and so on. 36. We have sent a messenger to every community, saying, "You shall worship God and avoid idolatry." Subsequently, some were guided by God, while others were committed to straying. Roam the earth and note the consequences for the rejectors. No matter how hard you try to guide them, God does not guide the ones He had committed to straying. Thus, no one can help them. Deep in their minds, they swore solemnly by God, God will not resurrect the dead. Absolutely, such is an inviolable promise, but most people do not know. We will then point out to everyone all the things they had disputed, and will let those who disbelieve know that they are liars. To resurrect the dead. To have anything done, we simply say to it be, and it is. Those who immigrated for the sake of God, because they were persecuted, We will surely make it up to them generously in this life, and the recompense of the hereafter is even greater if they only knew. This is because they steadfastly persevere, and in their Lord they trust. We did not send before you except men whom we inspired. Ask those who know the scripture, if you do not know. We provided them with the proofs in the scriptures, and we sent down to you this message to proclaim for the people everything that is sent down to them. Perhaps they will reflect. Did those who scheme evil schemes guarantee that God will not cause the earth to swallow them, or that the retribution will not come to them when they least expect it? It may strike them while they are asleep. They can never escape. Or it may strike them while they are fearfully expecting it. Your Lord is compassionate, most merciful. Have they not seen all the things created by God? Their shadows surround them right and left, in total submission to God and willingly. To God prostrates everything in the heavens and everything on earth, every creature, and so do the angels without the least arrogance. And the footnote says, the human body, whether it belongs to a believer or a disbeliever, submits to God. The heartbeat, the lungs movement, the peristalsis illustrate this submission. 50. They reverence their Lord high above them, and they do what they are commanded to do. God is proclaimed, do not worship two gods. There's only one God. You shall reverence me alone. To him belongs everything in the heavens and the earth, and therefore the religion shall be devoted absolutely to him alone. Would you worship other than God? Any blessing you enjoy is from God. Yet whenever you incur any adversity, you immediately complain to him. Yet as soon as he relieves your affliction, some of you revert to idol worship. Let them disbelieve in what we have given them. Go ahead and enjoy temporarily. You will surely find out. They designate for the idols they set up out of ignorance a share of the provisions we bestow upon them. By God, you will be held accountable for your innovations. Bigoted bias against baby girls. They even assign daughters to God. Be he glorified, while they prefer for themselves what they like. When one of them gets a baby girl, his face becomes darkened with overwhelming grief. Ashamed, he hides from the people because of the bad news given to him. He even ponders, should he keep the baby grudgingly or bury her in the dust? Miserable indeed is their judgment. Those who do not believe in the hereafter set the worst examples, while to God belongs the most sublime examples. He is the Almighty, the most wise. Okay. Masha Allah. So I read from verse 28 to verse 60. And, God willing, I'd like to go over these verses. So from verse 28 to 34 really talks about the differences between the believers and the disbelievers and what happens when they die, and how that is very different for the believers versus the disbelievers. And one of the principal duties of God's messenger of the covenant was to explain to us the difference between the death of a believer and a disbeliever, namely the idea that the righteous do not really die. And so the Quran informs us, based on verse 32 and 30 to 32, that for the righteous, they do not really die. The angels simply come and invite them. They live a happy life here, first of all, as we can see in verse 30. It says, for those who lead a righteous life, happiness And then it says, and the abode of the hereafter is even better. And gardens of Eden are reserved for them. And the angels terminate their life in a state of righteousness. So angels simply come and invite them to leave their bodies. And it's a very beautiful experience for the believers. Um, at the same time, it's a very terrible experience, extremely terrible experience, and painful experience for the disbelievers. The angels terminate their life in a state of wronging their own souls. They live a miserable life, first of all, and then when they die, uh, they die in a state of misery and painfulness. Basically, the angels beat them on their rear ends and on their faces and forcefully, snatch their souls out of their bodies. So it's a completely different experience for a disbeliever, and a scary one. Um, so obviously, we all want to be among the righteous who are going to make it. The reality is, not everyone's going to make it. Not everyone who calls themselves a believer is going to make it. So we all have to try really hard that we don't miss this opportunity to save our souls. Um, and the famous excuse that it talks about in verse 35 is pretty interesting. It always reminds me of something that I've seen personally, but I always used to look at this verse and never understood what it really meant until the circumcision issue came up and we were faced with this. But this verse is interesting, because it explains to you how people make this excuse. Apparently, it's a famous excuse, so we should all be familiar with it since it is that famous. Um, but I never really thought about it until recently. And so, what these people are doing is they're worshiping idols, they're committing idol worship, and then they're blaming God for it because um, God is allowing it to happen. Right? So, had God willed, we would not worship any idols, nor would our parents, nor would we prohibit anything besides His prohibition. So the way you would see it happen is like, people would be practicing idol worship, and then when you tell them don't do it, they'll tell you, well, if God, if you think that God didn't want us to do this, like, don't you think like uh, God would have stopped this from happening? How can people be doing it for millions of years and God didn't allow it to stop? And why are you coming and telling us now to not do it when all these people have been doing it? And it's it's true. I mean, this is a this is blaming God because and then it says, can the messengers do anything but deliver the complete message? So the idea is that you know uh, the messengers did come and they did tell people not to do it, right? They did deliver the complete message. They didn't just come and forget uh, certain things. Let's say, for the sake of this example, circumcision, right? So um, and I give you this example, like I'll explain it a little bit better. So in our lifetime, the messenger of the covenant came and delivered the message, said, this is the message, these are all the practices, and you just worship God, this is what you do, don't do anything else, right? So this is worshiping God alone. He delivered the complete message, and he delivered the mathematical proof to back up every single practice. Now, now his job is done, but these people are still practicing idol worship and these other things, and then they're saying, well, if God didn't want this practice to happen, then the messenger should have said specifically, like, don't do this practice, or don't do this idol worship, and don't do this idol worship. Well, he delivered the complete message. Everything you're supposed to do is mentioned, and everything you're not supposed to, everything else, he said, is not in the Quran. Quran says it's not in the Quran. That's idol worship. Don't do it. Right now, at this point, you cannot blame God or you cannot blame the messengers to say that they didn't tell you, because everything that they told you is here. Everything they told you is what they said you should do. So everything they didn't tell you to do, don't do them. And don't blame them for it. It's certainly not an excuse that God will accept on the day of judgment, because obviously that would be upholding another source besides Quran if you do that. Okay. And then verse 36 talks about sending a messenger to every community. Okay. And this is something that is also, I mean, interesting, because, not the messengers are God's commissioned messengers are set at certain specific times to specific group of people that, to directly bring the information from God to his messenger, and God releases certain new information, and then those messengers disseminate and preach that information. But then you and I could go and give that message to our family, our co-workers, friends, neighbors, and in that sense, those people also become familiar with the message and the messenger, and in a sense, you're kind of like a messenger, uh, in the sense that you go to these people and you deliver the message, and then you experience the same experience that some of these messengers would go through when you go and talk to these disbelievers, right? And you go to them, you say, hey, this is God's message. God says worship God alone, and we have a miracle, and this and they treat you in the same way, somewhat, where they would treat a messenger. Either they'd ridicule you, or attack you, or want to get rid of you and insult you, and everything. Might even kill you, if you're in, let's say in the Middle East or something, probably. And even if you're not in the Middle East, they might kill you. And they did the same for the messengers too. But God says, no matter how hard you try to guide them, God does not guide the ones He had committed to straying. Thus, no one can help them. So you can have people, these people could be your family members, your coworkers, like I said, your loved ones, but you could not save them. Like, Noah could not save his own wife or his son, and Lot, and these people were destined for hell, their relatives, and they could not save them. Same way, you could give the message to your relative, someone you really would love, and it could be your kids, it could be your family, and your parents even, and they will not accept it, because God has decreed that for those who choose to be guided, those are the ones that God will guide, those who deserve the guidance. And if they're heedless, then you can't do anything to help them. Now, verse 38 really tells us the reason why these people are different and they won't be guided, because deep in their minds, in their subconscious, they don't really believe in the hereafter, even though they may use, they may give lip service and tell God or the people that they believe in the hereafter. But if they truly believe in the hereafter, then God would open their eyes and they would become hearers and seers. Also, verse 40 tells us how easy it is for God to do anything. I mean, uh, we have human limitations. Uh, we have to go through a series of processes to get something from point A to point B. But for God, it's very simple. It's like, you can almost think of it as, uh, like, I think the closest we can come to it is like a remote control. We press a button and something happens at the other end with something, right? But like, think of it like more advanced, like, or we have Siri now. You say something, to a device, and it will do it for you, right? But similar, I think, somewhat with God. He just tells it to be, and it is. He just gives it a command, and we can't fathom how powerful God is, right? But he can just say it, something to be done, and it can be done somewhere like billions of miles away. Um, if you can think about that, it's just mind-boggling. Um, Anyways, verse 41 is, really, talks about God's mercy and his, how great, how generous, and how generous God is, and how merciful God is, and how gracious He is. Um, because God says that those who immigrated for the sake of God, because they were persecuted, we will surely make it up to them generously in this life, and the recompense in the hereafter is even greater if you only knew. Masha Allah, I love this verse, because this promises the believers that those who suffer through hardships, and immigrate for His sake, God is the most appreciative, and He'll reward them not only in the hereafter but in this life also, generously. Especially when you immigrate in the cause of God. You know, God says He'll surely make up to you generously in this life. I mean it, and the reason why it's important is because obviously when you immigrate in the cause of God, it would be very difficult for you to start over. Everything new, and it's requires a lot of trust in God, and perseverance, as we can see in verse 42. So because these people who do that, they have to steadfastly persevere and trust in God, God rewards them for doing that. When we observe the commandments that God has prescribed for us in the Quran, God rewards us in general. So when you do this, obviously immigrating in the cause of God and being persecuted, especially, um, is not an easy thing. I mean, when you're persecuted, I mean, you're set out, and compared to the worst, and so you're tested by these insults and hateful remarks and accusations and name calling, and all these things require perseverance to stay on the right path, because if you're weak, you know you will not be able to take it. And so we have to be strong and steadfast and persevere to be still on the right path after all of that happens. And so God rewards these people, and in this life, and the hereafter is amazing. And then God knows all the people that scheme evil schemes, as we see in verse 45 onwards. you know uh, God says the retribution can strike them at any time. um, Also, everything prostrates to God on earth, in the heavens and the earth, every creature, and so do the angels out of least arrogance. So how does that work? Even the disbeliever, you know uh, his body submits to God. He has no control of how many times his heart's going to beat, for example. God decides that, or will fail. uh, and our bodies is being controlled by God. I mean, imagine, for example, just think about, you want to move your hand, right? You want to lift it up from the table, let's say, like this. And but if you really focus on it, like, how is that happening? Like, how did you figure out that you're going to use your brain to command your arm to lift up? Who's doing that? It's not you, because uh, you just have this thought that you want to move it, but how is everything else happening? God has set this whole mechanism in place, and He's controlling it. And same goes for anything else. I mean, you eat your food, okay, and this might be a little graphic for some people, but let's say you eat your food, but I'll try to keep it less graphic. But, how you don't decide, like, what uh, digestive enzymes it will take in, and where it will go, and how it should filter out, and how to get those nutrients out of it. You don't do any of that. You don't even have any idea how that works. God is the one who has set it up, and if God wills that you don't get those nutrients, you're not going to get them. You know, and there's a mechanism for that. So, but you can't control it. It's all in God's hands, and that's how everything submits. Like, you could be an atheist or a disbeliever, but you cannot control your shadow. God is the one who controls it. It's in complete submission. God has set the laws, and the shadows are required to a phenomenon of light. But it's a submitter, and it follows all of God's law that He has set in place for light and so forth. And if one day God decides for your shadow to disappear, it will not be there. Might be scary, but God can do that. God can do anything, and so that demonstrates that everything submits to God. Um, Also, we can see that the verses talk about worshiping God alone and not worshiping two gods. Now, how can we worship two gods? Very easy. I mean, we can start following our opinion. We can start worshiping our egos, and our personal opinion can become our God very easily. And really, all of these gods that we could have, you could worship more than one God, more than two gods, actually. There'd still be two gods, because there's the other God is being Satan. You know, you could uphold the Trinity and idolize Jesus and Mary, but really, you have set up another God besides God. One is Satan, and the other is God. So you have two gods in that way. But we're commanded by God to worship Him alone and only follow God. Let's say uh, God tells us to pray 5 times a day, and then you start to pray 3 times a day. Well, that means there's another God beside God that is commanding you to pray 3 times. Um, and you're really committing idol worship at that point. You could do 6 prayers, for example, same thing. Um, and we have to reverence God alone. We have to make sure that there's nobody uh, in our life that commands the same respect and love as God. And then God is the one who believers love the most and reverence God the most, because there's no other entity as honorable and powerful and praiseworthy as God. His power is immense. He's the one who provides for us. He's the one who does all the nice things for us. And if He abandons us, we're going to lose everything that's we recognize as good and nice. All the blessings, so they all come from God. So He should have uh, the foremost respect and love and reverence from all of us if we truly worship Him alone. And that's what verse 53 is saying. Any blessing you enjoy is from God. So, but we don't think about that very often. But when some adversity befalls the human being, they right away go to God and remember God, and then they ask Him to fix it, which is true. Um, but when we have the blessings, we don't. And that's kind of disbelieving in what God has given us. And these people who do that, I mean, they're obviously, people who fail to recognize God's blessings and appreciate them, are disbelievers. Another name for a disbeliever is unappreciative. You know, so we must appreciate God for all the blessings that we have in our life and recognize them. You know, we have so many blessings in our life, and everything just goes unnoticed if we are heedless. And it's very important for us as submitters to know and recognize those blessings. Um, uh, Verse 56 talks about the idols that people designate out of ignorance, and even the share of provisions that they assign to God, and dedicating things to other than God. I mean, we see it all the time when people dedicate, food to God. I mean, to their gods, and to the saints and all that. And they give that share to idols. They offer foods to them, and things like that, and um, you know it says, by God you will be held accountable for your innovations. So if anybody creates innovations, they will be accounted for those innovations. So we can easily fall into that. Innovations can easily creep up in our religion if we decide to invent new ways to follow our religion. Like, let's say, God tells us to do our salat in a certain way, and today I decide, no, this way is, I'm not happy with this. For some reason, I want to do it another way. And you know, let's say, the Friday prayer, we're supposed to sit down uh, for the two sermons on the ground. That's how Abraham did it, and that's how it's been done, and his followers do it. And tomorrow, someone says, "Oh, well, I can sit on the couch now because there's couches are more comfortable." And tomorrow someone will say, "Yeah, and I can even pray on the couch. Like, why do I have to pray on the ground, like sitting? I want to pray on the couch." And for no reason. I mean, it's different if you have something wrong with your legs or something and you can't sit. God says, you're forced by circumstance. You can do that, but uh, you cannot create innovations, because next thing you know is, everybody thinks that's the way you can do it, and they all start doing it. Or circumcision, the example I gave earlier, is another good example of innovation. Something that you're not supposed to do, and people started doing as an innovation, and they started attributing to God, and now we can see the effects, right? So that's how the religion deteriorates. They create these innovations, they prohibit things, or uh, you know uh, things that are prohibited, they say they're lawful, and they create innovations. Innovations are great when it's not your religion. Technological innovations are awesome, but when it comes to our religion, we have to just follow. This is not a venue for your creative ideas. And we have been given the religion, we just have to follow. And if you create innovations, you just go to a very dangerous territory. And it's definitely a very scary thing to do, and I would uh, never ever dare to go that way. And we should ask God to keep us on the right path, because that's what Satan really wants us to do. Once we create innovation, then we have committed idol worship. And we know idol worship nullifies all our works, because those innovations are coming from other than God and not coming from God. And then talks about the girls and baby girls, and the bias that people have against girls, and we're all aware of that. Everyone who has children, especially in the Eastern cultures, even in the Western cultures. I mean, people openly declare their preference for boys over girls, and even the girls over boys. They're both wrong. Having bias We should be happy and thankful to God with whatever He blesses us with, if it's a boy or girl, and they're all, uh, you know, blessings from God, and we should be thankful to God for them. But these people had a bigoted bias against baby girls that they didn't want girls for themselves, but then they said God had angels as daughters, and uh, you know, where do you get that? Where do you get this idea that the angels were daughters, first of all? And then, it also talks about how these people who said that dislike to have girls, but then why would the angels be girls? And when they had these girls, I mean, this is so bad. Like, they ponder whether they should keep the girl or bury them alive. I mean, you would have to be really heartless, just a heartless disbeliever to do that. Um, the people that actually do that, if you go to countries like Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, and it still happens. People abandon the child just because it's a girl, and you may find them in the dumpster or something, which is kind of sad. But this is really a wicked act, and the disbelievers, God says, they set these examples, the worst examples, um, and we can see how that follows. So, um, with this, I like to conclude, and inshallah, you guys can comment and ask questions, God willing. Thank you.
Mashallah, good Quran study.
Thank you. Did I put everyone to sleep?
No, you covered all.
Okay.
You covered all. You did a very good job, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, mashallah, very nice. So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This Adam. Um,
Sounds
so when, Walaikum salam, brother. So like we have to follow Quran. This is the new law that God has placed. So and God has give us a window of some things that we must do. These are required, and there's some optional that you want to do extra, like meditating at night. And then there are some prohibitions. Then there's a window of that. And out of that, like God did not prohibit, for example, certain meat, like donkey suppose. And if somebody says this is forbidden, then that's another source that's prohibiting to eat the meat of donkey. Like that's just example I'm taking. So, so there's the window of must do, there's a window of optional, and there's a window of must stay away, like alcohol and pork and all that. Out of all that, everything is up to you, right? I mean, you can enjoy God's blessings. If you don't like something, you if you say that I don't want to eat this because I don't want to eat the certain meat because God forbid, then that becomes an idol worship, right? If you don't like something, like I don't like the eat of donkey or something, and then that's not idol worship. That's just God has given you a window of opportunity, and it's just your own opinion, or you don't like it, or you think there's a health benefit in this or no health benefit, and that's why I'm avoiding that. So that doesn't fall in idol worship, right? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, are you referring to it for circumcision, the health benefit? I don't know.
That
The reason,
could fall into it, but generally, if circumcision one thing, but generally, there's so many things in life that God doesn't say anything and neither
right?
forbid. And
Yeah, yeah.
in one of the surah that I think we are right there, we just read that, why do you forbid something that God has not forbidden?
Mhm.
Whatever you think. So, you know, so
Yeah,
for us
I
to,
mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I understand your question. I mean, when in general, I mean, this would be true. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer that too, but I would definitely like to answer that because in general, that would be true. Like, let's say you want to do some kind of a celebration of something, as long as you don't make it religious, you can go do celebrate. Let's say your son is born, you want to throw a party and do certain things. It's totally fine. Call relatives and go someplace and anything. Just think of it. Anything is fine as long as you don't make it religious, as long as it doesn't go against God's commandments, right? So, given the example of circumcision, um, it would be, um, it wouldn't go under the same thing as long as it doesn't violate other commandments. Like it. Let's say you want to do something, yeah. As long as you're not saying it's religious, you can do it as long as it doesn't violate other commandments. Now, what do I mean by that, right? I mean, it's like uh, you have a child. I mean, the Quran doesn't prohibit you to, let's say, cut off a finger of your baby, or maybe cut off his left ear or both ears. Quran doesn't prohibit that, right? Specifically. But for you to do that to another person against their will, goes against the Quran. So because God says in the Quran that why? Because God says that we God has made. I mean, it's their personal things. Their how do I say? It's your if why can't I go and cut somebody's ear off? Because I have no authority over it. I cannot aggress against someone. God says aggression is permitted only against the aggressors. And there's so many other verses that it violates, right? I mean, so we cannot take this into our hands and go and do it to another person, something that God has given them, right? So based on that principle, I would not do it. And because it's not mine, it would be different if someone's like an adult and they can think for themselves and they decide, I want it to look like this and I want it to look like that. Yeah, if you're not saying it's part of religion, you can go and do it. That'll be fine. But going and doing it to another person against their will, uh, even if it's not religious, you're breaking other commandments by doing that. The same commandments you'd be breaking if you go, like I said, you cut off another part of their body, uh, for whatever reason you think it is. Your intentions could be great. You know, let's say. I mean, I give this example of it might be too extreme, but let's say you have a girl and then you cut off her breast, one of her breasts, because you think she has less chances now of getting cancer, right? Because it's cut off. It's healthier in that sense now that it's cut off, you know. But the idea is, well, you know, if if you didn't do that, God could still give her health. I mean, you don't need to do things like that. Just follow, God's commandments, and everything will be fine. So we shouldn't have to go through the extreme. But it would work for any other thing. You can do things in general, to answer your question, that as long as they don't violate other commandments of the Quran, you can go do whatever you want. But I don't believe that circumcision is one of those things, because you're actually damaging another person against their will.
Oh, they did a survey and they talked to like a lot of people on the road, and I would say 99.99% people they had it done to them, and they didn't want anything different than that. And they asked a lot of females, and they also say they would not go with someone who has not been circumcised. So that's just the information I want to throw it out there.
That's really unnecessary, because that's, I mean, personal opinion. You know, I want to do this. I don't want to do this. It doesn't have to do anything with God's laws. Like it's if it's, I mean, if someone wants to do something, or they decide, they want their hair a certain way, like that's their opinion, uh, right? But I can't even go give you a haircut against your will, like cut off. I mean, I have no authority over it. It's up to you to go and, when you can make that decision, go and get a haircut that you like. But I cannot just go out in the street. I gave you an example, and do it to another person. You know, even though that person might end up liking it, let's say. But this, we all know this is not the same example as your hair, because your hair is going to grow back. So, but you're permanently altering a person's body. That's one example. Also, uh, the idea of mutilation is also covered in another verse, in the Quran, where actually Satan made this promise to God that he will distort his creation. And I can show you that is, this is in Surah 4, verse 119. Okay. Actually 118 and 119. It says, God has condemned him, and he said, I will surely recruit a definite share of your worshippers. I will mislead them. I will entice them. I will command them to forbid the eating of certain meats, marking the years of livestock, and I will command them to distort the creation of God. Anyone who accepts the devil as the Lord instead of God has incurred a profound loss. He promises them and entices them, and what the devil promises is no more than an illusion, right? So even though in this example you might be doing it for non-religious purposes, you're going and distorting God's creation by yourself, and even worse, you're doing it to another person. Um, uh, that is wrong. So I wouldn't. It would be different if somebody decided that it's good for my child, but it's really, uh, I mean, I don't want to change the course of this discussion, because we're talking about religion. So the thing is that if someone wanted it to be done to themselves, then you could ask them, and you could do it. It's the same for any part of their body. But my point to you was that based on religion, you cannot go and cut off a part of a person's body, permanently damaging it against their will. That will go against Quran, even if it's for a health reason, right? You cannot go and do it to someone.
Thank you, Masha Allah. Very nice and clear. Thank you.
Welcome.
And Adam, it would be like maybe based on that survey, right? It's more cultural because for generations, um, both party is accustomed to men being circumcised, right? So they're going by something that's cultural, traditional versus based on what Quran says. And for example, we know from Quran cousins can marry cousins. However, in this country, cousins have the stigma against marrying cousins because the cultural way of this country, it's kind of like a no-no. So that would be the opposite of circumcision. Circumcision, it's cultural, but it's not chronic. And with marrying cousins, it's chronic, but in North America, it's not cultural. If you understand what I say, what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Understand. As and we know that there's a lot of side effects of marrying cousins. There's a risk. I met many family members, married cousins, and there's the risk of Down syndrome and mental retardation is it rises when you among the family, as the DNA has less chance to evolve.
Adam, can you please speak up a bit more?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've seen many examples. I mean, I know this is chronic, but just on the side, I guess maybe people abuse it or something to the extent they keep marrying cousins. As far as greed goes, that the money wealth stays in the family. But at certain point, I've seen the families they have been marrying cousins in generations. The Down syndrome and the mental retardation risk rises, and you can see clearly in their kids, but they still do it. I mean, did you hear me?
Yeah, I think about that, I mean, uh, I don't I don't really trust these studies because they do these studies and then later they find out nice, science keeps progressing, so later they find out, well, it wasn't really this, it was that. So uh, I I would probably think that if God said it's something that's lawful, then it's okay, and God will take care of the retardation. If someone deserves to have a retarded child, then they'll get a retarded child, whether they marry a cousin or someone outside the family. And you know, if we like a lot of times these studies, they're very inconclusive in the way the studies are conducted, the way the data is collected, everything. Sometimes people do these studies because they may have a certain bias, for example, even, and they're trying to get a certain outcome. They also do studies based on that. So you can never really like these kinds of studies. I'm always skeptical of because if God allowed it to happen and made it lawful, then I don't think that it's easy for me to say, well, it's bad for you. Um, it could be, but I have no means of verifying it, and so I always just like to treat this with a grain of salt. I mean, of course, if you want to believe something, like that, and you should really thoroughly like go through and investigate the entire study and how the data was collected and how the research was done and stuff like that. Like for example, coming back to the idea of circumcision, uh, like the studies that they conducted about it obviously were all false because they were doing these studies for a very specific reason to encourage people to do this for various reasons, financial gains and all that, and so uh, they conducted these studies because they knew, oh, if we do it, bring it as a study, people will believe them, and then that's how they manipulated things and like making people believe that they will get AIDS, for example, and it like reduce. For example, the study said that circumcision reduces the chances of people getting AIDS, right? And then this is just an example. And then the people the people who were circumcised, they were shown, like in Africa or something, they did it right, and then they were specifically instructed on how to use contraceptives, while the people that were not circumcised were not given this information. But this was deliberately ignored in the study because they wanted a certain outcome. So that's why even the studies, like we have to uh, really investigate before we believe them. That's all.
Masha Allah, yes, whatever Salman said, I totally agree because for years I believed that circumcision study that they did in Africa and I held on to it. And when the circumcision debate started last November, I revisited that study. And then if you go down that rabbit hole, exactly what Salman said is true.
Yeah, no, I understand. One of the things that, can you guys hear me? I just switched my mic.
Yeah, we can hear you well now. Before we couldn't.
Okay, I'm sorry. So about the cousins marrying, one of the, I think it will support the Quran idea that God allows certain things, it's okay to do it. I mean, I think the verse that I was reading was that it was about God prohibits who you cannot marry. And out of that, God doesn't, I don't think, if you can correct me on that, God does not say to marry a cousin, but there's a there's like a circle. God says these are the one prohibited for you, and out of that is allowed. So these things are allowed to us, but at the same time, I think my point is that like God allows you to eat sugar, but if you eat too much, it's going to harm you. There's a moderation. And actually my example was the families that I've seen that they are generations doing it, so just to keep the wealth within the family. So there's a greed part that gets in, and they go to so extreme, then their DNA has not have chance to evolve, and so they have higher. I've seen the higher chance of in that sense. So maybe I think when God allows something, you still have to take in consideration that you're not abusing the God's law. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Adam, I totally agree because I know, especially the royal family, it's like that, and they were probably suffering from hemophilia, I think, the inability to clot their blood. So that is true. Cousins after cousins after cousins after cousins, and doing it after greed and all this thing. That is true. However, we're not allowed to prohibit it at the same time because Quran did not prohibit it.
Oh yeah, I'm agree totally on that. We cannot prohibit.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Oh, can I have a comment on verse
Sure.
35, inshallah? Yes. It's about famous excuse of idol worshippers. Um, Alhamdulillah, we know that God is never unjust towards the people. And for example, He sent warners to every community to correct itself, denounce idol worship, and then they have to choose to uphold the truth or falsehood. There is no excuses after such warners, and we see that in many verses like 35, 24. God said, "We have sent you with the truth, a bearer of good news, as well as warner. Every community must receive a warner. And in Surah 54, verse 4, sufficient warnings have been delivered to alert them. Great wisdom, but all the warnings have been in vain. Also, we see in Surah 41, verse 46, God said, "Your Lord is never unjust towards the people." And also in Surah 50, verse 29, "Nothing can be changed now. I'm never unjust towards the people." Yeah, that's my comment on this verse, inshallah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this really shows God, doesn't leave people in the dark. He makes sure that people have no excuse on the day of judgment, and this famous excuse obviously is also just an excuse for the sake of making an excuse that's never going to be accepted. Any kind of idol worship uh, is not going to be accepted, because we already bore witness to God that we're going to worship Him alone and not set up any idols besides Him. So all these excuses will definitely not be entertained. Um, but people still think that they will be clever enough to argue their way into paradise when they try to come up with all these back doors and loopholes, and like uh, all these different justifications, uh, but on the day of judgment, none of these will be accepted. Yeah. So,
I was looking at verse 37, and I seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. It says, no matter how hard you try to guide them, God does not guide the ones he has committed to straying. Thus, no one can help them. So many people, they'll see this and they'll say, God already committed them to straying, so there's nothing they can do about it. But isn't this all come back to free will and where we were at the feud? And God saw our life before we actually live it on earth and saw what we were going to do anyway.
sorry, could you repeat that?
So verse 17, right? 37. Verse 37. I seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. It says, no matter how hard you try to guide them, God does not guide the ones he has committed to straying. Thus, no one can help them. So many people would watch this verse, and from the second line it says, God does not guide the one he has committed to straying, and they would say, okay, right away they'd say they don't have a chance. But isn't this all come back to free will, and God saw us living our life first? God saw us living our life, all based from going back to the feud. And we had the free choice to choose. We chose, and God seen what we were choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And based on God saw what we chose, that part comes into play. He has committed. God does not guide the ones he has committed to straying. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I do. There's all, but you can also look at it this way. Like, God's system is that those who are seeking the truth, those who are seeking the guidance, God will guide them. So God also knows people's intentions. Eventually, yes, some are guided and some are misguided. And God knows, like, certain souls that deserve the guidance, they're giving, God has given them the good souls. I mean, God has given them the good jinns, for example, that, they will also be convinced and all that. Uh, and so, if you, but if you look at the mechanism for guidance for someone, I mean, for those, God says, like Surah 19, verse 75 says, say, those who choose to go astray, the most gracious will lead them on until they see what is promised for them, either the retribution or the hour. This is when they find out who really is worse off and weaker in power. Or, there's another one people who choose to disbelieve. People actually make that choice. It says, Surah, uh, you can see the footnote for actually 1693. It says, God knows the sincere among us who deserve to be redeemed. Accordingly, he guides them. This is a footnote. Accordingly, he guides them while blocking out those who choose to disbelieve. So the verse says, had God willed, he could have made you one congregation, but he sends astray whoever chooses to go astray, and he guides whoever wishes to be guided. You will surely be asked about everything you had done. I should have read the verse first and then the footnote, but yeah, I see that God also is based on your decision. If you choose to be guided, then God will guide you. If you choose to follow what you think is correct and ignore what God is saying, then those people go astray, and then they're tricked into thinking that they're being guided. Um, but I guess if you look at it the way of predestination, like what it says was Abraham smart enough to discover God, or uh, uh, that one, the one I'm talking about. Uh, smart. This which one is? Let me just search one smart. Yeah, this is 2151. It says, Abraham. Before that, we granted Abraham his guidance and understanding, for we were fully aware of him. And then the footnote says, was Abraham so smart as to discover God, or did God grant him the intelligence because he knew that he deserved to be saved? As it turns out, the whole world was created to redeem those among us who deserve redemption. When the angel suggested that all the rebels, humans and jinns, must be banished out of God's kingdom, he said, I know what you do not know. 230. At the same time, this world proves Satan's incompetence as God. Uh, yeah, so it works kind of in both, God knows, and then uh, he also knows that, what decisions you're going to make, right? So based on that, you are guided or misguided, because God knows what kind of person you are. So he already knows what kind of decisions you're going to make, and based on that, he either guides you or leads you on.
Thanks, Salman. Mashallah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, but that's a good point, mashallah. For us to think about. But we still have, as far as we're concerned, we have a complete freedom, right? We have the complete freedom to choose to, pick our paths.
Can I also say something about it?
Sure. Yeah,
I
I would
mean,
say if nobody's talking, you guys don't need to ask. I know everybody's
um,
being polite, but just if you have a comment and nobody's talking, just make your comments that way.
okay, thank you. I think also, it all comes down to your sincerity, who you are sincere with. Are you sincere with? I mean, I have seen real examples of, I will see a family, and they're practicing something, and then I will tell them, open the Quran, and I say, look, it will be black and white. It's as simple as somebody is adding 2 + 2 as 5, and I say, look, in the Quran it says 2 + 2 is 4, and they can see it. But yet the excuse I've been getting was that, oh, you think you're smart, we've been following these people, they have spent all their life in dedicated into religion, and this is what they say, and we're gonna leave them to what you're saying. I say, I am not saying anything. I'm just showing you the Quran. And in Quran, God says this is how you do this certain thing. And that's all. It's not my thing, but they get offended and they get upset. So it all comes down to sincerity. Who you sincere with? Are you sincere with, whoever you follow? Or are you sincere with God? If you're sincere with God, because God knows your sincerity, and if you're sincere, God will guide you to the right path. If you have flaw in your own heart, and that will only take you to the darkness. You know. I mean, as in the beginning of the Quran, God says, in chapter Surah 2, that they have disease in their heart, for the disbelievers and hypocrites, something like that. So I want to make a comment on 28. If somebody has anything to say.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I thought somebody was
Don't,
coming out, so I kind of stopped.
uh,
Verse 28 is this stuff. It's just amazing, when we were growing up. As a child, back home, we used to read stories about, Aladdin and all those things. And there was one story about Abi Zamzam, There's a elixir of life, it's called, and there were a lot of stories that people search for this water where you can drink it and you can live forever, you never die. And I always thought, as a kid, is there really a water of Abi Zamzam that you can drink it? No, not Abi Zamzam. Something called elixir of life. I'm forgetting the name of it. Maybe you might know. So there's this elixir you can drink and then you can live forever. But it's just a story, and we never seen a practical person who lived forever and can tell about us. But if you read the surah, verse number actually 30, it actually telling you about that elixir. And elixir is righteousness. The righteous people, they don't die. They live forever. As soon their time comes, the angel might step up on your door, and you may, just like the story of Abraham, you may not recognize them, and they're angels. And here you have a cup of tea ready, and you're just about to have a hot breakfast, and they come and they say, and they come in a very beautiful form, maybe, I'm just saying, and they say, your time has come, you want to go, and you said, and they will ask for you, you want to finish your breakfast? I say, forget about the breakfast, let's go. So they just kind of go with them, they don't even taste. And that's kind of similar to the elixir of life, the story you've been hearing. Just wanted to just throw it out. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Adam, we think that was a good analogy.
Oh, I just remember that elixir is we used to call Abe Hayat. Hayat is life, Ab is water, water of life.
So one, I don't know if anybody have any more questions. You did just a thorough job.
And you're just making excuses for not commenting. Just kidding.
Generally,
Yeah,
I
Masha
have
Allah,
a lot
thank
of,
you.
generally, I have a lot of blind questions.
Yeah, Masha Allah. Masha Allah, thank you.
Yeah, my vote would be for the like if you're taking vote to start at 9 a.m. for California time would be better. Just my vote. You don't have to consider, but it'd be better for me also.
So for you, Adam, 9 o'clock is good.
Yeah, because I live in Texas. My time will be at 12, but I work the night shift, so it'll give me an extra hour of sleep too. Because I come in the morning and I'll go to sleep after
Okay.
Fajr, and then I can wake up at. I give me extra.
Nice.
But it's just if everybody's okay. No, you don't have to do it for me.
You
I
mean
can get it
10
done.
or 9?
9 a.m. for California time.
Okay, okay. So
Yeah.
so you're saying how would you sleep more? I didn't understand. You're
No, no, I
saying
work. Yeah, Friday night. I work and I will come in the
you
morning and then
but you sleep
Oh, got it.
oh,
Got it.
but
yeah,
wouldn't you be
probably
sleeping less if it's earlier?
no, I'm delaying 1 hour. You guys start at 8 a.m. Saturday, right?
No, no, we start at 9. We were saying we should have it at 10.
10. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, 1 hour delay. Sorry, you're right. One
So
hour delay,
so
like 10
10.
o'clock.
Okay.
10, yes. Oh yeah,
Okay.
I think he's
Okay.
still tired, maybe.
Okay.
Hey, Salman, I'm good for 10. If
Uh,
everybody else is good for 10, we're good for
okay.
10.
Yeah,
Because,
Okay.
I know it's 9 o'clock, probably difficult for you.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think Nujat was one of the people who said that it was difficult, but I can ask her too, God willing. And if she's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Yeah, and also, if we're going to start at 10, can we
Hmm.
start promptly at 10?
Hmm.
Because if we start at 10, which is
Hmm.
2 o'clock my time,
Hmm.
and Quran study sometimes lasts for 2 hours, but then after
Yeah.
that, I can go off and do other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can just say 9:30 and then we'll start.
So you're working with Deshi time?
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, yeah, we're good for that too. If you
Hmm.
say 9:30 and then we all
Hmm.
start promptly at 10.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. Okay, so anybody else has any more comments? Inshallah. If not, then we could probably end the broadcast and then we can just have a free conversation. Uh, what do you guys think?
Yeah, we're done. We're done with comments, like online comments. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, okay, okay. So in that case, thank you everyone, those who join us on the study and those on YouTube. And God willing, our next study is going to be on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And our teacher is going to be, um, well, Adam,
Yes.
would you be able to uh, lead the study on Wednesday?
Inshallah. Where do we start? At 59?
61.
61?
60. Yes.
Yeah, 61.
Yeah,
60.
inshallah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Adam will be our teacher, God willing.
Inshallah.
Next.
Original sin.
Yes.
Okay.
Salãmun Alaykum.